The night was bitterly cold in New York City. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, covering the streets in a thin white blanket. The wind howled like a lonely wolf, biting at anyone brave enough to be outside. Most people hurried home, bundled in thick coats, eager to escape the freezing air. But not everyone had a warm place to go. Inside a sleek black car with windows so tinted no one could see inside, a woman sat gripping the steering wheel. Her name was Victoria Kensington, and she was one of the richest women in the city. But at that moment, she didn't feel rich. She felt broken. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she stared at the traffic light ahead, waiting for it to turn green. Her mind was racing. Just a few weeks ago, her life had been perfect. She had money, a beautiful home, and a fiancé who claimed to love her. But everything changed when she found out she was pregnant. Her fiancé, a man named Richard, had not been happy. "This wasn't part of the plan," he had said coldly. "I'm not ready for this." And just like that, he walked out of her life, leaving her alone with a baby on the way. Victoria wiped her tears angrily. She had always been strong. She had built a business empire from nothing, fought her way to the top in a world that didn't always respect women like her. But this felt different. This wasn't about money or power. This was about her heart. And right now, her heart felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces. The light turned green, and she pressed the gas pedal gently, her car gliding forward. She wasn't even sure where she was going. Maybe home. Maybe nowhere. She just needed to drive, to think, to escape the crushing loneliness. Then, at the next red light, she saw him. A small figure, hunched near the sidewalk, shivering in the cold. At first, she thought it was a pile of old clothes, but then she saw movement. It was a boy. A young black boy, no older than 10, wrapped in a thin jacket that was too big for him. His hands were tucked under his arms for warmth, and in one of them, he held a piece of cardboard with shaky handwriting. "Hungry. Anything helps." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The boy's face was gaunt, his cheeks hollow. But his eyes were different. They weren't just sad. They were strong, determined. Like he had seen too much hardship for someone so young, but he wasn't giving up. Something inside her shifted. Without thinking, she rolled down her window. The icy air rushed in, but she barely noticed. "Hey," she called out softly. The boy turned, surprised. He hadn't expected anyone to speak to him. Most people walked past without even looking. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked, even though she already knew the answer. The boy hesitated. He wasn't used to kindness. The streets had taught him that people either ignored him or yelled at him to go away. But this woman's voice didn't sound mean. It sounded worried. "Just cold, ma'am," he mumbled, his teeth chattering. Victoria's heart ached. She had been so wrapped up in her own pain that she hadn't noticed how much worse things could be. Here was a child, alone in the freezing cold, with no one to care for him. And she had a warm car, a mansion, more money than she could spend in a lifetime. The light was about to turn green again. She had a choice. Drive away and forget this moment, or do something. She made her decision in a heartbeat. "Get in," she said. The boy's eyes widened. "What?" "Get in the car," Victoria repeated, reaching over to unlock the door. "It's too cold out there." For a second, the boy just stared. Was this a trick? Was she going to hurt him? But something in her face told him she wasn't like the others. She wasn't pretending. Slowly, he stepped forward, his worn-out shoes crunching in the snow. He pulled the car door open and slid into the warm leather seat, his body trembling from the cold or maybe from fear. Victoria didn't say anything else. She just turned up the heat and drove away from the curb, leaving the freezing street behind. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment, this one small act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. The diner was warm and bright, a cozy little place with checkered floors and the smell of fried food and coffee filling the air. Victoria guided Jamal to a booth in the corner, away from the curious eyes of other customers. The boy sat stiffly at first, his hands folded in his lap, as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. His eyes kept darting to the door, half expecting someone to yell at him to leave. Victoria didn't rush him. She just slid the menu across the table and said, "Order anything you want." Jamal stared at the menu like it was written in another language. He had never been given a choice before. On the streets, he ate whatever he could find: half-eaten burgers from trash cans, stale bread from day-old bakeries, sometimes nothing at all. Now, a whole world of food was in front of him, and he didn't know where to start. Finally, in a small voice, he said, "Can I have pancakes?" Victoria smiled. "You can have as many as you want." When the food came, Jamal ate like he hadn't seen a real meal in years. Syrup dripped down his chin, and he didn't even care. He shoveled bites into his mouth so fast Victoria worried he might choke. She gently pushed a glass of orange juice toward him. "Slow down. It's okay. No one's going to take it from you." Jamal paused, his fork hovering midair. He looked at her like he wasn't sure if he believed her. But then he nodded and took a deep breath, forcing himself to eat slower. As they sat there, Victoria studied him. Up close, she could see how thin he really was. His wrists were bony, his cheeks hollow. His clothes were dirty and too big, like he had found them in a donation bin. But despite all that, there was a quiet strength in him. A toughness that shouldn't belong to a child. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jamal," he said between bites. "How old are you?" 10. Maybe 11. "I don't know my birthday." Victoria felt a pang in her chest. A child who didn't even know his own birthday. "Where's your family?" Jamal's shoulders tensed. He stared down at his plate, suddenly not hungry anymore. "My mom. She got real sick last year. She didn't wake up one morning." His voice was flat, like he had told this story too many times in his head. "After that, I stayed with my aunt for a while, but she said she couldn't afford me. Told me to leave." Victoria's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. She had heard stories like this before: kids falling through the cracks, families too poor or too broken to care. But hearing it from Jamal, seeing the way his face closed off when he talked about it, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She wanted to ask more, but she could see the wall going up behind his eyes. So instead she said, "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." Jamal gave a tiny nod, relieved. They sat in silence for a while, the clatter of plates and murmur of other diners filling the space between them. Then, without thinking, Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a napkin. She dabbed at the syrup on Jamal's chin, like a mother would. He froze, eyes wide. No one had done something like that for him in a long time. Victoria realized what she had done and quickly pulled her hand back, embarrassed. "Sorry. Habit." Jamal just stared at her for a second, then went back to his food. But this time, he ate slower. Like he was savoring it. When the check came, Victoria paid without looking at the total. Then she turned to Jamal. "Where are you staying tonight?" Jamal shrugged. "Under the bridge, probably. Or the bus station if it's not too crowded." Victoria's stomach twisted. She thought about her penthouse, huge, empty, with more rooms than she could count. And this boy was planning to sleep on a bus station floor. Before she could second-guess herself, she said, "You can stay with me tonight. Just for one night. You'll have a real bed, a shower, whatever you need." Jamal's eyes narrowed. Why? It was a fair question. In his world, nothing was free. People didn't help unless they wanted something. Victoria didn't have a good answer. She just knew she couldn't leave him out there. "Because it's cold," she said simply. Jamal studied her face, looking for the lie. When he didn't find it, he gave the smallest nod. That night, Victoria took him to her penthouse. Jamal's eyes went huge when he stepped inside. He had never seen a place so clean, so fancy. He walked slowly, like he was afraid to touch anything. Victoria showed him the guest room. "This is yours for tonight. The bathroom's through there. There are clean clothes in the dresser. They might be big, but they're clean." Jamal just stood in the middle of the room, looking lost. Victoria hesitated, then said, "Do you need anything else?" Jamal shook his head. But as she turned to leave, he suddenly blurted out, "You're not gonna lock the door, right?" Victoria stopped. Her heart broke a little. "No, Jamal. I'm not going to lock the door." He nodded, but she could tell he didn't quite believe her. The next morning, Victoria expected him to be gone. Kids like Jamal didn't stick around. But when she walked into the kitchen, there he was, sitting at the table, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He had showered and changed into the clothes she left out, though they hung off his skinny frame. "You're still here," she said, surprised. Jamal looked up. "You said just for one night. But I didn't know if I was supposed to leave or wait for you." Victoria realized he had been sitting there, unsure what to do, afraid to touch anything. Waiting for instructions like a soldier. Something inside her cracked open. She made him breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, real food, not scraps. Jamal ate carefully this time, like he was trying to remember his manners. Victoria watched him, her mind racing. She couldn't just send him back out there. But what was she supposed to do? She was pregnant, single, and emotionally wrecked. She wasn't exactly in a place to take in a homeless kid. But then Jamal looked up and asked, "Do you got a baby coming?" Victoria blinked. "How did you know?" Jamal shrugged. "You keep touching your stomach when you think I'm not looking. And you got that." He gestured vaguely at his own face. "That tired look my mom had when she was pregnant with my little sister." Victoria's breath caught. "You have a sister?" Jamal's face darkened. "She died when she was a baby. Before my mom got sick." Victoria didn't know what to say. So she just told the truth. "Yes, I'm having a baby. And I'm scared." Jamal studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "My mom used to say being scared means you care. So it's okay." That one sentence hit Victoria harder than anything else. This kid, who had lost everything, was comforting her. That was the moment she knew. One night wasn't going to be enough. Over the next few weeks, Jamal stayed. At first, Victoria told herself it was temporary. She'd help him find a foster home, a shelter, something. But every time she tried to bring it up, Jamal would tense up like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, something unexpected happened. Jamal started helping. Without being asked, he would tidy up the living room. He learned how to make simple meals. When Victoria came home exhausted from work, he'd have a glass of water waiting for her. One night, Victoria broke down crying over the nursery. She didn't know how to put together the crib, and it felt like one more thing she was failing at. Jamal, who had been quietly watching, walked over and picked up the instructions. "I can read it," he said. "We can do it together." And they did. Piece by piece, they built that crib. And for the first time since Richard left, Victoria didn't feel so alone. Meanwhile, she used her money and connections to track down Jamal's family. Maybe there was an aunt, a cousin, someone who would take him in. But what she found broke her heart. Jamal's aunt had moved away and didn't want to be found. His other relatives either didn't exist or didn't care. The system had lost track of him long ago. He was just another invisible kid. That night, Victoria sat in her bedroom, staring at the adoption papers her lawyer had drawn up. Was she crazy? She was about to have a baby. She was a mess. What if she failed them both? But then she thought about the way Jamal had started calling her V, because Victoria was too long. The way he always saved half his dessert for her, even though she never asked. The way he had held her hair back when morning sickness hit, without a word of complaint. This kid, who had nothing, had given her more than anyone else ever had. The next morning, she slid the papers across the breakfast table. Jamal stared at them, his brow furrowed. He was still learning to read better, but he understood enough. His hands shook when he looked up. You want to be my family?" Victoria's eyes burned. "If you'll have me." Jamal didn't answer with words. He just launched himself across the table and hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. And just like that, two broken people became a family. Time moved forward like a river, steady and sure, carrying Victoria and Jamal into a future neither could have imagined that first cold night on the street. The tiny baby growing inside Victoria when they met was now a lively 6-year-old boy named Ethan, who adored his big brother Jamal more than anything in the world. The penthouse that once felt too big and empty was now filled with noise and laughter and the happy chaos of a real family. School permission slips covered the refrigerator. Soccer cleats littered the hallway. There was always music playing somewhere, usually too loud, and someone was always asking what was for dinner. Victoria had changed too. The heartbreak that once weighed her down like chains had slowly lifted, replaced by a purpose she never expected. Every time she looked at Jamal, at how far he had come, she thought about all the other kids out there just like him. Kids who needed someone to see them, to believe in them. So she used her money and power to do something about it. Kensington Hope Homes started small, just one building in a rough part of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe, with warm beds and hot meals and tutors to help kids with school. Victoria made sure it didn't feel like a charity. She wanted it to feel like a home, the kind of place Jamal had needed all those years ago. At first, people thought it was just another billionaire's pet project. But Victoria surprised them. She showed up every week, not for cameras or photo ops, but to read to the kids or help with homework. She remembered all their names.
Word spread. More buildings opened. Then more in other cities. Soon, Kensington Hope Homes became something people actually believed in, something that made a real difference.
Meanwhile,
Mal was growing up in ways that took Victoria's breath away. The skinny, quiet boy who once hesitated to take an extra pancake was now a confident young man with a sharp mind and a kind heart. School had been hard at first. He was years behind other kids his age, but he worked tirelessly, staying up late to study, refusing to give up. His teachers called him remarkable. His classmates looked up to him. And when acceptance letters to colleges arrived, one stood out from the rest: Harvard, with a full scholarship. The night they got the news, Victoria cried happy tears while Ethan jumped around the living room cheering. Jamal just sat quietly, staring at the letter like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "I never thought." He started, then stopped, swallowing hard. Victoria squeezed his shoulder. "I always knew," she said softly. Harvard was everything Jamal dreamed it would be, and also nothing like he expected. The classes were hard, the workload brutal. Sometimes he called home late at night, voice tight with stress, and Victoria would remind him how far he'd already come. Other times, he called excited, talking a mile a minute about some new idea or project. He majored in social work, determined to help kids like himself. On weekends, he volunteered at shelters. During summers, he interned at Kensington Hope Homes, learning every part of the operation. People noticed. Newspapers wrote articles about the billionaire's son giving back. But Jamal always corrected them: "She's my mom, not just a billionaire," and redirected the conversation to the work itself. Years slipped by in this rhythm: Victoria expanding the shelters, Jamal growing into his purpose, Ethan tagging along to events and declaring he would run the whole thing someday. They weren't perfect. They argued sometimes about curfews and chores and whose turn it was to take out the trash. But through it all, they never forgot how lucky they were to have found each other. Then came the night of the big gala, celebrating the opening of the 100th Kensington Hope Home. The ballroom glittered with lights and expensive dresses, but Victoria only had eyes for Jamal, standing tall in his first real suit, shaking hands with donors and politicians like he'd been born to do this. Later, when the speeches were done and the cameras were off, she pulled him aside. "You saved me that night, you know," she said, voice thick with emotion. "When I picked you up, I was so lost. You gave me direction." Jamal smiled, that same quiet smile he'd had as a boy, only now it came easier. "No, Mom," he said, pulling her into a hug. "We saved each other." And standing there, surrounded by proof of all the good they'd done together, Victoria knew he was right. That scared pregnant woman and that hungry little boy had built something beautiful, not just the shelters, but this family, this life. The next morning, over pancakes, always pancakes, they started planning the next 100 shelters. Because the work wasn't done. But whatever came next, they would face it together. The years flowed by like pages turning in a well-loved book, each chapter adding depth and meaning to the story of their lives. Jamal Kensington, once that shivering boy with a cardboard sign, now stood tall in a polished office overlooking the city that had once nearly swallowed him whole. The nameplate on his desk gleamed under the morning light: Jamal Kensington, CEO of Kensington Hope Foundation. It had been Victoria's idea to pass the torch. "You've earned this," she'd said one evening over tea, her silver-streaked hair catching the firelight. "These are your ideas, your passion. The foundation should be yours now." At first, Jamal had protested. How could he ever fill her shoes? But Victoria had simply smiled and reminded him, "You're not filling my shoes. You're walking your own path." And walk it he did. Under Jamal's leadership, the foundation exploded in ways even Victoria hadn't imagined. He pioneered programs pairing homeless youth with mentors who'd once been in their shoes. He built tech centers in shelters so kids could learn coding alongside reading. When a devastating hurricane hit the Gulf Coast, it was Jamal who chartered planes full of supplies while mobilizing their network of shelters to take in displaced families. Ethan, now a sharp-eyed 22-year-old with his mother's business acumen and Jamal's compassion, worked alongside them, focusing on sustainable housing solutions. Think bigger than shelters, he'd argue during their weekly family dinners. We need communities where kids can put down roots. And so they did. But for all the growth and change, some traditions remained sacred. Every December 21st, the anniversary of the night Victoria had spotted Jamal at that red light, they canceled all meetings, turned off their phones, and took to the streets. Bundled in thick coats against the winter chill, they walked familiar sidewalks with thermoses of hot chocolate and bags full of meals prepared by Ethan's wife, a chef who'd grown up in one of their shelters. This year was no different, though the group had grown. Victoria, her hair now fully silver but her posture still regal, carried a stack of foil-wrapped sandwiches. Jamal balanced a tray of cookies baked by his twin daughters earlier that morning. Ethan and his team distributed socks and gloves donated by their corporate partners. Even little Micah, Jamal's 4-year-old son, helped by carefully handing out candy canes with solemn concentration. "Just like someone once did for me," Jamal murmured as he knelt beside a trembling teenager huddled in a doorway, pressing a warm meal into reluctant hands. The boy's eyes, hollow with the same exhaustion Jamal remembered all too well, flickered with wary hope. Victoria watched from a few feet away, her breath making clouds in the cold air. Memories overlapped like ghosts. That first diner meal, teaching Jamal to tie a tie for his high school graduation, holding his hand during his first nervous board meeting. So many moments, big and small, that added up to this. Later, as they packed up their supplies, Ethan nudged Jamal. "Think that kid back there could be the next you?" Jamal glanced at the retreating figure now devouring the meal as he walked. "Could be the next anyone. That's the point." Victoria slipped an arm around both her sons as they walked back to the car. The city lights twinkled around them, each window telling its own story of struggle and hope. Somewhere out there, another woman might be crying in her car. Another child might be holding a cardboard sign. But thanks to the ripples they'd created, one act of kindness at a time, those people wouldn't be alone for long. The true measure of their wealth wasn't in bank statements or property portfolios. It was in the thousands of beds now occupied in their shelters. It was in the graduation photos sent by kids who'd once slept on park benches. It was in the way Micah, without prompting, had offered his favorite mittens to a shivering stranger earlier that evening. As their car pulled away from the curb, Jamal caught Victoria's eye in the rearview mirror. No words were needed. The greatest fortune any of them had ever found was sitting right there in that car, a family built not by blood, but by choice. By love. And so their work continued. The end.